Skuggy crouched beside him, filling in the proper words when his memory faltered, and sternly forbidding any shortcuts or doubling up of ritual gestures. "Learn the basics first," Skuggy reprimanded him. "Then you'll know for certain where you can trim the fat. You're terribly sloppy at summoning elementals. You've got to get better. Elementals are a wizard's most valuable allies. I'll introduce you to Skotvopen, a nice little elemental who's looking for a wizard patron. He's young and inexperienced like you, but very eager. Those mossy old elementals Bjarnader calls upon are used so often by so many wizards that they've gotten irritable about it." On the following day, Bjarnader's temper had returned to normal, so Agnar slipped unobtrusively into the hall, filled to bursting with anticipation. With nonchalance and Skuggy's prompting, he summoned Skotvopen. It was a clear and bright burning elemental, instead of the sullen red fireballs Bjarnader summoned, and Skotvopen was willing to be molded into any form, from great bolts like lightning to a shower of small burning darts. When Agnar had exhausted his limited commands, Skotvopen returned obligingly to hover over the brazier in a brilliant column until Agnar banished him. There were no tricky explosions, no counterattacks, and no misguided sparks to burn holes in Bjarnader's gown or beard. Agnar stifled the urge to yell and jump up and down in elation, and maintained a modest demeanor, even though the other apprentices were staring in awe and Bjarnader was chortling and rubbing his hands with satisfaction. Hrifa's face was like a disappointed thundercloud, already sensing his inevitable decline into a dismally distant second place behind Agnar. Agnar gloried in the benevolence of Bjarnader's approving glances, and revelled in every bit of additional advice the master singled him out for, and wondered why he had waited so long to discover the joys of being the favoured scholar. His present satisfaction was far superior to the wicked glee of pulling pranks. One evening, when he had been released from his lessons early as a reward for doing so well, and he had returned to his tower to coax more advanced spells from Skuggy's keener ears caught the sound of wheels and hooves approaching Bjarnaderskjöld. He leaped to the window-sill to sniff the night air, and his fur stood on end in a ridge from ear to tail-tip. "Follow me quickly," Skuggy hissed, his eyes suddenly blazing. "Swear you'll do exactly as I tell you." By now, Agnar had learned not to question Skuggy's orders. "I swear," he muttered, wondering who was actually in charge in their familiar apprentice relationship. They crept into the hall unnoticed as Bjarnader was welcoming his guest, the highly distinguished wizard Goldvilder, who visited the school several times a year. Not only was he famous and powerful, he was kind to lowly apprentices, always speaking to each one by name and giving him a small tasty gift. Agnar put himself at the end of the receiving line, his mouth watering. They never got cakes, and these were filled with fruit and oozing with sweet juice. As he received his, Skuggy twined around his ankles, yowling as if he were begging, but to Agnar's ears the voice was perfectly plain. "Throw it back in his face. If you take one bite of it, you'll fall fast asleep for 2 days." Agnar hated himself, but he hurled the cake back at the genial Goldvilder, and everyone in the hall gasped in horror. Bjarnader glared, disappointed and angry, with smoke curling out of his ears. "That's our Agnar," he apologized stiffly. "He's going through a difficult stage right now. I fear it's only going to get worse for him." He hoisted one singed eyebrow significantly. "I don't know what came over me," Agnar said faintly. "At times my power is too great to control." Goldvilder eyed Agnar mildly and brushed the crumbs off his chin. "It's no matter," he said in a genial tone. "I was young once myself. Mischief seemed to come naturally." At the table, Skuggy climbed onto Agnar's lap beneath the table as he always did, and hooked choice bits off his plate for himself. "Skuggy," he muttered, "you're ruining my entire life with these pranks. Don't make me do any more." "Hush," said Skuggy. "This is going to be interesting. Just do as I tell you, and nothing will go amiss. You swore an oath you'd do as I told you." "I must have been mad," Agnar growled. "Why abuse poor old Goldvilder?" "Agnar," Skuggy hissed, when the jug of mead was brought from the kitchen, "don't let Bjarnader drink that. It's poisoned." A come hither spell directed amiss jerked the cup out of Bjarnader's hand and spilled it over his gown. He glowered straight at Agnar, his lips moving, but Skuggy hastily put the words in Agnar's mouth to avert whatever spell it was, diverting the energy into the roasted fowls before Goldvilder, which burst into flame and turned to cinders. A spirited youth, your Agnar, Goldvilder observed with a tolerant chuckle, starting to pour another cup of mead. Skuggy whispered, Agnar spoke, and all that came from the flask was sand. The silence in the room was awful, with everyone gazing at Agnar, the apprentices in terrified admiration, and Bjornadr in smoldering rage. Goldvilder only smiled sadly and shook his head. He's got to get it out of his system somehow, he said. Another jug was called for, but Skuggy allowed this one to be poured and swallowed. As Skuggy predicted, the other apprentices all fell asleep soon after the sweet cakes were eaten at the end of the meal, leaving Agnar and Skuggy to face the two wizards. They settled beside the fire to smoke their pipes. Goldvilder leaned his staff against the wall, carved with runes and topped with a dark ruby orb. Off with you to bed, Agnar, commanded Bjornadr, and be certain to take that wretched cat with you. I'm going to deal with both of you tomorrow. I believe I'll stay a bit longer, Agnar said, and sat down on a stool opposite Goldvilder. Skuggy hunkered down watchfully, his eyes upon the two wizards. Let the lad stay, Goldvilder said, amused. I like his spirit. Perhaps you've met your match, Bjornadr. It's nothing I can't correct, Bjornadr grunted, turning back his sleeves and removing his long pipe from his belt pouch. Tomorrow, with a hazel switch. That's a fine cat, Goldvilder went on, offering his pouch to Bjornadr to fill his pipe. I had a cat much like that myself once. A delightful companion he was, but he came to a very bad end, I'm afraid. Cats often do, it seems. Do try this leaf, Bjornadr. It's the finest you'll ever know. Skuggy purred loudly and rubbed his chin on Agnar's clenched fists. The pipe, he muttered. Get rid of it. Obligingly, Agnar incinerated the pipe before Bjornadr could draw one breath on it, blackening the wizard's face and littering his clothes with hot little embers and bits of shattered clay. Bjornadr hopped up with an inarticulate roar of wrath and rapidly dusted away the fragments of his beloved pipe, and Agnar knew he was doomed. He was about to flee for his life, but Skuggy tripped him up, sending him sprawling. Well done, cat! Bjornadr seized Agnar by the collar and shook him, while Skuggy yowled. Now I've got you, Agnar. Not one more ridiculous prank. Now, Agnar, Skuggy shouted, leaping up to knock Goldvilder's staff out of his reach, just as he was reaching for it. A loud squall conveyed everything Agnar needed to know, and it left him gasping in terror. Agnar twisted around to face Goldvilder, summoning a powerful voice from unknown depths. Fara af stad Bertu, I know your name to be Mord Corpse-Eater. Now I command you to reveal yourself. Goldvilder's patient smile twisted into a sour grimace. With a smoky puff and a gust of ice-cold air, the appearance of Goldvilder melted away, revealing Mord Corpse-Eater, clad in tattered black and bedecked with the amulets and tokens of the necromancer's trade. He flinched away, swatting at unseen darts of power released by Agnar's words, trying to find his staff without taking his eyes off Bjornadr and Agnar. Curse that cat, he sputtered, stung in a dozen places at once as he groped for his staff, but Skuggy pounced on it and rolled it away. Blast you, Bjornadr! Gottgvold Draugeater! Agnar shouted, and with a terrible shriek, Mord burst into flames. Bjornadr belatedly bellowed spell words, raising his staff and blasting Mord with a force that threw him against the wall. He thrashed about, shriveling and shrinking, melting into a black pool of ichor, save for his cloak and staff and amulets, one of which was Agnar's hairlock, tied up with colored threads. Bjornadr lifted the magical objects carefully with the end of his staff and edged them into the fire, where they burned with crackling ferocity. Well then, that's the end of your hairlock, he said to Agnar gruffly when he was finished. I thought it was all another of your hoaxes until it was almost too late. You've saved me from becoming another of Mord's trophies. Or was it merely another accident? Agnar shrugged, his throat still dry as he looked at the puddle that had been Mord Corpse-Eater. Skuggy crouched at Agnar's feet, protective even as his eyelids sagged toward a doze. Skuggy told me. He's the one that saved you. Mord sent him here to work harm against you, but I learned his name and got control over him. Sort of. Bjornadr blinked and snorted, a smile breaking through the soot. He dropped a companionable hand on Agnar's shoulder and squeezed it fondly. Well, perhaps. If you say he's your familiar, then I shall do my best to believe you. I'm amazed that you saw through his glamour spell and I didn't. But I knew from the start that I'd make a wizard of you, with a little work and patience. I never doubted you a moment, my lad. Oh, perhaps I did, once or twice. I think it's time you moved on to more interesting spells, and rooms of your own, away from these common, chattering numbskulls. And whatever you like from the kitchen, of course. I foresee taking an assistant one of these days, a talented youth with a great talent for magic, but only upon one condition: no more mysterious accidents. Agnar glanced down at Scuggy, who blinked and said, "What, and spoil our fun?" Agnar scowled at him and said firmly, "Of course. I'm in charge of my skills now. No more accidents, my story. You don't mind Scuggy, then?" "Of course not, my lad. Your cat is welcome anywhere," declared Bjarnader, bending down to thump Scuggy's back heartily as if he were a dog, and followed this ill-conceived gesture with a gusty sneeze. "Perhaps you'll do something about the mice overrunning the scullery. Come along, we must have a serious talk about your future, now that you've just graduated from apprentice to assistant." Agnar soon found himself in the enviable position of assistant. In this exalted capacity he was called upon to assign the menial duties of the school, none of which devolved to himself: to invent tests of skills, to administer thwacks to laggard apprentices, to sit at the Maestari's right at meals, and other agreeable duties. His skills far surpassed Frifa's, whose life became one of disappointment and envy. Scuggy never again advised him to throw cakes in Goldvilder's face, and his stripes and bars achieved even greater distances apart, rendering his runic belly completely indecipherable. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you all enjoyed that story. It is one of the stories collected in the book Cat Fantastic, which was edited by Andre Norton. I hope I'll be reading a few more. I haven't finished it, but so far this is the first one I really liked. Thanks again. I hope you all have a nice evening.